I started my dealership when I was 19 years old in 2013. And so I've been running it for 11 and a half years now. When I started the dealership, I was working as an EMT and a firefighter, and I had always kind of gotten into businesses ever since I was a kid. And over the years, each business kind of morphed into one business into another. And somewhere along the way, I switched up from business and got into EMS. And when I got into EMS, I had simultaneously gotten into the car business. And if you've heard any of the podcast interviews leading up to this, then you know I started kind of as a curb stoner. And then the curb stoning morphed into a business. Somewhere in 2013, when I formed the business, there was no real, I guess you could say, business plan. I was kind of just flying by the seat of my pants. I grew the business for about 9 months while working EMS full time, and then I ended up leaving EMS to run the car dealership full time. When I left EMS, I didn't have any employees. The business had grown substantially. I was working 70, 80 hours a week, and I knew that something had to change, but I didn't know exactly what had to change to get to where I wanted to be. So around the end of 2014, I started looking to hire an employee, but the first employee pretty much went something like, you're looking for a job, I'm looking for an employee, come to work for me. And so you can imagine how that went without putting any processes or asking any questions. I'm sure we've all been there where we hire someone without taking any appropriate steps or processes up front, and then they kind of wash out. And so I'll get into this shortly, but the first employee I hired, he lasted about 9 months. And I met him at a Christmas party, and basically it went exactly like I just told you. He was looking for a job, he had just totaled his company's truck, they fired him, and I hired him on the spot. It's probably one of the worst decisions I ever made in hiring. After about 9 months with him, he washed out. I was disappointed in him, although I never taught him how to do anything correctly, didn't teach him any of my expectations or any of my processes. After that gentleman, I ended up hiring a guy who kind of changed my life. I went through an interview with this gentleman, and we asked a couple questions, and it wasn't a full-blown interview like we do now, but we hired the guy, and he changed my life in the way that I hire now. So I ran with that gentleman for a few years, and then somewhere along the way, he went on to be a full-time firefighter, and I had to replace him. At that point, we had bought our facility in York, South Carolina from renting for the previous 4 years, and that facility demanded that we were there full-time versus the previous 4 to 5 years where I was part-time. Basically, in the part-time days, I could run the dealership by appointment only. I didn't need full-time employees to run the thing. And when I started hiring employees to staff the dealership full-time, that's when I started making a lot of mistakes because it demanded a lot of people. So somewhere around 2016, I got really serious with things. And here's kind of a picture of how the dealership started. Started in a storage building, and then what you see on the right there is the second location we were in. That's where I hired the first 2 employees. Once we moved to York, South Carolina, that's when I realized I was going to have to get really intentional to stop the attrition that we were dealing with. JM&A says if you hire 10 people within a year, 8 of them won't be with you anymore. And that's if you do everything right. So you can imagine if you don't do everything right, how many is going to be with you at the end of that. So I'm sure we've all heard about the roller coaster effect when it comes to sales or inventory, and basically that's where you're really busy, you sell a lot of cars, and now you're down in inventory. And then you go out and you buy a lot of cars, and it's just the same cycle over and over. You sell a lot of cars, you're down in inventory, you buy a lot of cars, you're back up in inventory, you're back down. So The same thing happens with hiring that I've found. So you need one person, you hire one person. You train that person. They disappoint you because you didn't set the expectations correctly, or they just weren't a good person from the start, or you ruined one of the three. And so then you go back and you rinse and repeat. You start looking again because this person's no longer with you. You start all over, and it's just a roller coaster effect because you didn't do anything right from the start. So, I'm going to give you 10 tips today that I've used over the last 11 years, more specifically over the last 3, that have helped me change the way that we hire and staff the dealership. Now, I hear a lot of people say this, and this one bothers me a little bit because I think a lot of times we don't take accountability as owners and say, maybe the problem was me. Did I get them bad, or did I make them bad? And I'm a very hyper-accountable type person. I believe in extreme accountability, and more times than not, I put the blame on myself. I think a lot of times, I don't think I hired a bad employee. I think that there were red flags in the beginning, just like with most relationships or friendships. And instead of recognizing the red flags and choosing to acknowledge them, I ignored them, hired that person, they disappointed me. And then for some reason, I was disappointed because they didn't work out, but I knew in the beginning they weren't the right person. So I'm sure all of us have hired someone where we felt like that's a good person, and then we look back for like a few years down the road and realize that we made some mistakes as owners, or at least I hope you recognize that. Something I already gave you, but this comes from JM&A. Of course, if you hire 10 people, 8 of them will not be with you in a year if you do everything right. So one of the very first things that I recommend you all go back to your dealership and do, if you want to hire top tier talent, you're going to have to make sure that you look the best you possibly can before you ever interview that person. I'm sure a lot of us focus on our Google business listings, our Facebook pages, and all our other social media channels and make sure that we look the best we can online. So why are we not doing the same and having the same intentionality when it comes to recruiting? Why do you not have your current employees or your former employees who are happy leave your reviews on Glassdoor and Indeed? You have the power to get in front of the bad reviews that can come from Glassdoor and Indeed. Ask your current employees to write good things about your dealership if they have good things to say. If you don't write good things, don't ask them. Ask someone else. So this is all free stuff. You don't have to pay to be on Glassdoor. You don't have to pay to be on Indeed. And you can take control of your Indeed and Glassdoor profiles before you get a bad review. Once you get a bad review, you're already behind the 8 ball. Once you've set your brand image, if you will, for recruiting, the next thing I recommend you do is determine exactly who you're looking for. For many years, when it came to recruiting, I never knew who we were looking for. I would interview someone, determine they were a nice person, hire that person for a job, and you guessed it, they washed out, they didn't work, and I blamed them. So establish what are your non-negotiables. What will you absolutely not tolerate when it comes to this person? Is it their former time on job? Did they bounce around from job to job? Or is it, you don't like the color of the car this person drives? They're a Chevy fan, you're a Ford fan. Whatever the case may be, sit down, write out a list of the non-negotiables for you and your culture. What's it going to take for this person to fit in and be a part of the team? And then also, think about if you want this person to have experience. A lot of times in the car business, we want someone to come in and save us from our own nightmare, when in reality, we created a problem, and we don't need someone to save us. We need to teach someone the way we want things to be. We need to establish that up front. And a lot of us don't do that, myself included. I've been victim many times. I've tried to hire managers to come in and save me from a problem that I've created, and they made the problem worse. Once you establish who the person you're looking for, once you establish what they look like, you need to write a good, compelling ad. Even to this day, I see vendors in the car industry say they're looking for a sales rep, and the whole job description is 2 sentences long. I'm looking for help to sell this software, or I'm looking for help to sell this product. And they don't talk anything about the opportunities to come to work for their company, any of the benefits, the vacation time, the culture of your company, the things you do outside of work. And I would add, I talk about the things we do outside of work. I talk about the things I do for my employees. That's important. Why would I waste my time clicking on your ad on Facebook, which is a high funnel channel anyways? Most people aren't looking for jobs on Facebook. But if you're going to take the time to write an ad on Facebook, give people a reason to click on that ad. If you like to hire people who don't have any experience in the field, talk about how you're going to take that person from 0 to hero. Talk about what that process looks like. A lot of times in this industry, when I'm looking to hire someone, I find that they don't know anything about it, and the reason they didn't click on my ad is because they didn't know anything about the car business, and no one has ever told them about the car business, but more importantly, they didn't know how they were going to be successful in the car business. And I think the same thing is kind of true when it comes to customers, when it comes to acquiring customers. A lot of times, especially if you work subprime, one of the main questions you get is, how do you do your financing? A lot of people in hiring and recruiting, they don't know anything about your company and they're scared to ask. So try to answer all of these questions up front. And when you write an ad, video, it's helpful a lot too. It doesn't have to be all text, because people are more likely to stop and click on a photo or video than they are to read all of that. Once you've wrote a good ad, you're going to have to determine how you're going to conduct the interviews, or how you're going to set the interviews. A lot of people mess this stuff up. If you go on Indeed right now and post an ad, you're probably going to get 150 to 300 applicants. That's very discouraging as an owner who has 1,000 things to do on a day-to-day basis on your plate. It's no different than receiving a lead from any of the third parties, and you let that lead sit for 7 days, and then you go try to reach out to that person. They've already bought a car. Same thing with hiring. Why would you reach out 7 days later? You're probably not necessarily looking to work for you or your company, especially if you found them on Indeed, or they found you on Indeed. So, figure out how you're going to set these interviews. If you're an independent, you probably are, you're sitting in this room. I would highly recommend you look into a third party to help you with some of the heavy lifting. It takes a lot of manpower to set 150 interviews, and it's even more discouraging when you set 150 interviews and about 10 of them show. So, you need someone to help with that, the same way you have a BDC. Salespeople get discouraged, whereas the BDC doesn't. Same thing with hiring. One thing I like to do when we set the interviews, I like to give simple instructions. We send a video with every interview we set. Where to park, what to bring, a notebook and 2 pens. And I'm just looking early on to see if this person is going to follow very simple instructions up front. If they're not, it might not be that they're not a great person, but they might just not get a ticket on my bus. I recommend when you do your interviews that you be very consistent in the interview process. I use the Word document you see on the screen. I use this process, and I don't always ask every single question, but I'll always use this sheet in every single interview. Another thing at the end of my interviews that I like to do is ask myself the questions on the back of the sheet when the person leaves the room. Are they an internal or external type person? Do they take accountability for all the jobs they left, or was it always someone else's fault? I don't like external people where they blame everything on everyone else. Does the person walk with intent, or when we were walking to the interview room where they're scooting their feet the whole time? That bothers me. I don't like to see that. That's me. What are their goals in life? What are their dreams? Can I help them achieve those things? If I can't change this person's life in some way, I don't want them on my team. Now, they might not stay with me forever, but I want to feel like I can have an impact in their lives. Because in my store, we're family, and I'm sure in a lot of your stores, it's a tight-knit group, and you feel like family too. After you set the interviews, you need to be prepared for the odds, and if you set 10 interviews, one might show. And that can be discouraging and really disrupt your process. I can talk more after this a lot about setting the interviews and some of the things you do in the interviews, but in the name of time, we probably don't have the time to go into the interview process that we conduct and everything that goes in our interviews. And we've done it 2 different ways, and we've used 2 different third parties, but that's another story. Once you've set the interviews and you've offered someone the job, or you told them you would have them an answer by, if you conducted the interview Friday at 5 p.m. and you told them you'd have them an answer no later than Monday at 5 p.m., you need to have them an answer Monday at 5 p.m. It's the same thing with promising a client something when it comes to a sale. If you make a promise, you need to honor it, because you're going to lose the attention of this person early. You're going to kill the energy of the whole thing. If you told this person you would have them an answer Monday at 5 and then you don't give them an answer until Monday at 7, you've already set yourself up for failure with this candidate. They're not going to be excited about coming to work for your company. I recommend you always make the offer in writing. There are times that we do not, or I have not. Recently I had this happen where I did not make the offer when I said I would, and the person was constantly following up with me. Hey, I'm concerned. What should I be expecting? You said you were going to do this. I'm not perfect, okay? Just because I wrote this doesn't mean we always hit all of these points, okay? This is where a lot of us really go wrong. I'm sure you've seen this video. It was viral years ago. The bird throws the other one out of the nest, and it's because there's a weak link in the nest. So this is where a lot of us go wrong when it comes to onboarding. We don't train them. We don't set expectations. We don't have their items ready on day 1. And you're already starting the process of that person washing out. I highly recommend when it comes time to onboard this person, day 1, have their email logins ready, have their emails created, have their business card ready, have their desk clean. Don't have the crumbs and the other nasty things from the last person in that desk. Have their uniform ready. If you have custom embroidered shirts, find out in the interview what size they wear so you can get all of this lined up if you don't stock these items in-house. For me, I start onboarding as soon as we make the offer. That way there's no chance of us, 1, getting in legal trouble with not doing the state required or federal required items in the 3 days you're allowed. I order business cards, and sometimes we throw a lot of business cards away. I order business cards as soon as I make the offer. There's a lot of times the person never shows up on day 1. But we did everything, I believe, right up until that moment. If the person had showed up and you didn't do everything right up until that moment, you'd have had challenges on day 1, and you're already setting a bad expectation with that candidate. Training and expectations. So if you're taking brand new people from the outside in who know nothing about the car business, I recommend you type out a process of what day 1 through the end of year 1 is going to look like with this person. What are you going to do to help them succeed? How are you going to make sure they're successful at your dealership? Talk about what the training looks like. Let them know upfront what your expectations are. Send out your policies upfront. Who's going to conduct the trainings? It's probably not going to be you, the owner. You're too busy. So think about who that person is going to be. You put all this work into getting this far, and that's a lot of work to get to step 7. You put all this work in, don't ruin the whole thing now. One of the things that I'm really proud of about my store that I see a lot of dealers that call me and they say, hey, Tim, I'm struggling with XYZ item. How often do you have trainings? How often do you have one-on-ones? Well, we haven't had a one-on-one in a year. You can't expect a lot of that person. If you don't set the expectations and communicate their shortcomings, how can you be disappointed when that person is not performing to your standards? If you don't have someone in your store capable of doing one-on-one trainings in person, I highly recommend you look into third parties. There's a lot of free stuff out there if you don't have the budget to do it. But there's also some really good trainers out there that will train your people for you. Now, that comes with its own problems as well. You have to be careful because, they're building that training to a broad audience. So it might not be exactly relatable to your store. In my store, we have one-on-ones every single week. And it's not bad things. It may not be good things. It might just be, hey, this is where you're at. And I'm proud of you for doing this. But when you have consistent one-on-ones, you set the expectation that we're going to work on these items on a regular basis. So when little Johnny has a problem and you call him in your office, it's not like, oh God, why am I going to the office? No, they know every week or every month, whatever that training expectation and one-on-one expectation is, it's communicated up front so they know all the time. Hey, we're going to talk on Tuesdays at 10 a.m. and it's going to be good and bad things. The biggest thing with some of the former managers I've had that impacts my staff negative with regards to one-on-ones and training is when they don't get them. They come to me and say, hey, when am I having a one-on-one? Which is crazy to me because when I was an employee, I never liked one-on-ones. Mine were usually bad. So it hurts me as an owner when an employee comes to me and says, hey, when's my next one-on-one? So they want this feedback. They want to know where their shortcomings are. One of the things that I'm guilty of is not holding people accountable sometimes. It's a hard thing to do. It's really important. If there's no accountability in your store, it's going to run wild. I would say one of the reasons that I am more successful and my attrition is not 80% is because I do give a lot of grace. If my BDC or my salespeople need time off for their kids, everyone in my store has kids. If they need something, they need it all last minute because of something at the school or a child sickness, I don't get frustrated and upset. I'm understanding. And they can go and work anywhere. And especially in this generation, when I say this generation, I mean probably 40 and down, they don't care about money as much as former generations do. They care about their time off and their schedule. And so if you can't speak to the things that are important to them, you're going to hover that 80% attrition rate. I will say at my store, it's one of the funnest places I've ever worked in my entire life. Almost as fun as EMS was. EMS was something I think I was born for, but in my dealership, we're always having cash competitions when it comes to sales and BDC competitions. Different things win different prizes all the time. There's always something going on. And I pay those out in cash. And it keeps the competitiveness really fun. I'm always feeding my team. My accountant told me the other day, in fact, we were just closing out 2023. She's like, your meals and entertainment is like way out of line. And I don't know what to say to that. We buy a lot of food for my team. When the Soul Eclipse was happening, everyone asked if they could take the time to go outside and do it. As much as it pained me to watch them watch the sun for 30 minutes, I allowed it to happen. We have a trophy that we give out every month. And it's crazy how people fight over this trophy. But it keeps things fun. It doesn't have to be all about selling cars. It can be about more than that. One of the things a lot of owners don't do, and a few of my community group members are in here, and I know a lot of owners, even the best operators, don't do this. And I'm not picking on any of you, but this is really important, this next one. Go beyond the workplace. They care that you care about things other than work, their kids' birthdays, their anniversaries. Make your relationship with your employees about more than work without HR violations. At least once a month, we get together and we go to dinners. My team always picks the destination. Top Golf is one of our favorites. Escape rooms are a really great way to build the team environment and make people want to work together. I've never came back from one of these events and had a bad week. Every time we come back from one of these events, we have a record week. A couple other things we do beyond some of the things I've already listed is I'm involved in the high school. I'm involved in the local community college career fair. We may not always make a connection where we recruit someone from that career fair, but we're always spreading our seeds along the way. And this is probably one of my favorite things to do, is to be involved in the next generation. Because had it not been for people giving me a chance, I wouldn't be here today. We got through this kind of fast, but I would say for 8 years I did everything completely wrong, in my opinion. I didn't care about the employees the way that I should have. I didn't protect culture. I allowed bad managers to erode the culture and let them run things their way. And it cost me a lot of money, a lot of heartache, a lot of sleepless nights. I can't tell you how many times, especially in those first 8 years, that I wanted to get out of the dealership and go back to EMS or go back to something else I knew would be easier than this. In my dealership, single-handedly recruiting, retaining, hiring, it is the absolute hardest thing that I've ever done in the dealership. I used to think growing a dealership was about finding a bigger floor plan or finding more finances or more money or all these other things. You need to spend more money on marketing. And all of those things are important, but if you don't have the right people in place and the right processes to give them the growth they need and hold them accountable, you're going to waste a lot of money on all those other things. None of it's going to work. Unless you get lucky, but I did. I will say that anytime that we recruited a candidate from another workplace, especially in the car business, we've always heard that, man, this is, it never feels like work. And it always feels like a playground in a good way. Here's a tired car box, and this is what I feel like most days after dealing with HR and personnel issues. It's not going to be easy, but the last 3 years that I've been really intentional about changing this process and listening to the mentors in my life that have taught me the things I'm teaching you now, it's all been worth it. And today we have 11 employees. 3 years ago I had 3. And that's a lot of people to go through. I think to get to those 11 people, I think I've hired maybe 25 or 30. So that puts me in a little better odds, I guess. But you're still going to blow through a lot of people, even if you do everything right, especially getting to that core team. We still got a lot to grow into. The dealership today sells 45-ish cars a month. I think with the staff we have, we should be at 60, but I think it comes down to how new most of my staff is and the processes that are still evolving. That's pretty much all I have for you on recruiting. There's my contact information. Feel free to take a picture of that. And if you want this presentation, I'll be glad to email it to you. And if you have any questions, then I can take those down. Right.
Yeah. Setting expectations and holding accountable. Can you talk more about that? In particular, higher level managers, where there's less well-defined process. Maybe you operate this way. I don't know. The higher level of GSMs, those types, are they defined down to more new detail, like a detail would be? Can you talk about how you manage it?
So the higher level managers, I do hold accountable. The details are definitely in my store not ironed out the same way they are for the detailers and the salespeople. At the end of the day, their accountability falls on me, and sometimes I find it hard to have those hard conversations. But I do have a managers meeting every Tuesday at 8 a.m. And even if I'm absent, I still ask them to always meet, no matter if I'm there or not. And I want them, you know, they're each accountable for bringing their own numbers to the meeting. What is our, you know, what's happening in finance? What's happening in sales? What's happening that might need HR attention? My inventory manager, I ask him to bring his numbers. And in that meeting, you know, because it's a regular meeting, it's really easy to hold people accountable when you constantly are setting the expectation. But where I fail sometimes is when we don't have the regular one-on-ones or manager meetings.
So the managers get one-on-one, everybody in business gets one-on-one directly with you?
Not everyone gets a one-on-one directly with me. The managers get a one-on-one with me once a month.
Okay.
And it's not as scheduled with the managers as it should be, but it's better than it's ever been. It's still at least once a month. It's just not as defined on the calendar as what the sales manager does for the salespeople and the BDC agents. Yes, sir.
This looks like the website that you guys talked about for the private council, right? So does that mean you turn the inventory dedicated?
Are you asking how often do we turn our inventory?
Yeah.
We turn our inventory 8.97 times a year. So there's probably about 10 cars that are not online right now. And I only know that number from doing it in the morning group.
How does one win the top bullshit award?
So that goes to the salespeople, and it's based off of units. But I let the salespeople name the award. We had about 10 different names thrown into the pot, and they all voted on it. And I didn't want to name it that, but they love it, and it really creates a good conversation. Customers don't seem offended by it, so.
Tim, how many salespeople do you have, and what's their average sale per month?
Marty, I wish you'd asked me this question 2 months ago. I had 4 salespeople in March. We sold 47 cars, best month we've ever had in the history of the company. And one moved to Miami because that's where his family was, and he wanted to live there. It was a blind side. I couldn't replace him fast enough. And in fact, we still haven't necessarily replaced them. And then we lost one to the Army. So for me, I'm glad they left the way they did because it's not anything I did wrong. Those were goals they had, and I knew that when they came into leadership. So right now we're down to 2 salespeople with 3 BDC agents. Last month we sold 37 cars with 2 salespeople, which they loved it. They got paid really well.
Do you have an employee handbook to use, manual?
I do have an employee handbook. The employee handbook has been running for about 3 years now. The insurance company, workman's comp and general liability, they usually ask for a review of it once a year, and every year they ask me to add something to it once they have their piece on it. I send it to my attorney to have him review it just to make sure that, you know, we're within the guardrails. And I do make everyone sign the employee handbook, and I make revisions every year, usually around September, October.
What's your pay structure for your salespeople?
Pay structure for salespeople. So I pay my salespeople a salary, and they get a percentage of front and back, and it's tiered. 10, 12, and 15%. And it's 1 to 10 units pays in 10% front and back. 11 to 15 units pays in 12% front and back, and 16 plus pays in 15% front and back. On top of their salary. My top salesperson, last month, between the 2 salespeople, one did 13,000 and the other one was about 7,000. Which, to me, that's a lot of money.
Quick question, 2 parts. The first part is, with you doing the majority of the hiring, are you recruiting kind of all year long? And because I know, like you said, you know, if I interview somebody on Friday, I'm gonna give them an answer by Monday. I know like, a lot of us get into that situation where you're hiring out of necessity, right? You don't start looking until you've lost someone. And the second part of that question is, especially when you're so invested in culture and process, when is enough that you know somebody has to leave?
I'm ADD, so you might have to repeat the second part of the question in that, but as of the last 6 months, we've never stopped recruiting. I don't know if I like this way or the way we used to do it. It's easier on me as an owner of the way we used to do it. The way we used to do it was we run the Indeed ad for about 10 days. We fill up this large funnel of people. We only interview them Monday through Thursday, round 1. Round 2 would be Friday, where we'd invite all the second interviewees back. And then we would make the offers on the spot. I like that way because you could bring in 3 or 4 people at a time. If you were trying to fill 1 or 2 positions that worked really well, and you could train them all at the same time. And if one didn't show up on day 1, it wasn't a big of a deal. But quick war story is this week we were supposed to start a gentleman on Monday. He was the only person supposed to start. He didn't show. Allegedly he's sick. Well, he's still out there.
You're really sick. Yeah, you're really sick.
Yeah.
You got COVID 27.
Yeah. And then the second part was, what is enough, right?
Yep.
I usually find that enough is enough. Actually, probably the enough was enough when I interviewed them. I usually look back. Every time someone doesn't work out, I'll always go back to their interview sheet because I save everything. I look back at their interview sheet and go back and look at my notes. And there was some piece of instability there that I said yes to, and I shouldn't have. But there's some things you just can't overlook, you know. Without getting too involved, obviously things like sexual harassment, discriminating against any kind of protected class, those are immediate, you know, on-the-spot termination. Attendance issues, I try to be lenient on. I'm trying to get better with being lenient on attendance issues because that's what this generation, it seems to be what they appeal to, is having their time off. But after so many verbal and documented issues, we've got to move on. Hopefully that answers the question. Yes, sir.
Can I get your thought on like rehiring employees?
I never rehire employees. Well, that's a lie. In 11 and a half years, I've only rehired 1 person, and he was away from the company for 8 years. And the reason I rehired him is because I failed him. He didn't fail me. Now he's not in this picture, but I don't think it was ever his fault. He was the first employee I ever had, and as soon as I fired him, we became best friends and stayed best friends for the next decade. And so I gave him another chance, and I'm really glad I did, but we had a really, I don't want to say tough conversation, but we had a really long conversation that lasted several weeks leading into rehiring him because I told him I did not want to ruin our friendship. And so it works better now than it did 10 years ago because now he's accountable to a different manager and not me. And so that makes managing him much easier. But he's also matured a lot in 10 years, and I have too. So it's been very successful. He sold 18 cars last month.
Where do you mostly post your ads?
Where do I post my ads? So I use a third party to do our interviews, or to set the interviews and post the ad. Indeed, Glassdoor, and Facebook are the big ones that we do. There's some other ones out there, ZipRecruiter, and also I recommend, one thing I didn't mention, and the additional things you can do, I recommend creating a YouTube video that talks about your hiring and recruiting. Create several videos, because when someone searches jobs at Evans Auto Sales, that video is going to get indexed by Google and it's going to show up in those search results.
What would you recommend for employees that are having conflict between them?
What would I recommend for employees who are having conflicts?
Just to resolve the issue.
So one thing I implemented years ago was, if you're going to complain about another employee, when you come to me, bring me the solution in your mind. If you're not bringing me a proposed solution, I don't want to hear the complaint, because otherwise it feels like you're just nagging. And that's worked pretty well, because when you're forced to develop a solution, it really makes you think about the whole problem, in my opinion.
I was going to ask you more about group hiring. I'm just about to hire 4 buyers. I just want 1 or 2 good ones, but I'm making 4 job offers. When you do that, do they know that you really don't want 4? And this has been my case. Or if they don't work out, would you keep them all?
If they all work out and you don't need one of them, please call me, because we're close enough that I'll take one. But, I don't think that's going to happen. At least it's never happened for me. There's always been something, but I love group hiring. For me, it's been the most successful of any way I've ever done it before. But no, they don't all know that. But I've never had, if I take 4, 2 are there at the end. Anything else? I've also seen a bunch of hands raised, no? In the early part, I should ask the questions. Nothing. You didn't? You do? You don't? You do? No? Anyway. Anything else? All right, well, if I can help you in any way, I don't have all the answers, but I'll certainly give you anything that I can.